Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm very excited to be here with John and Aubrey and have this conversation with you. I kind of want to start out by saying yesterday was a very inspirational day for me. You know, I went to sleep thinking about the conversations that I had. And I just want to give a little shout out to Z Prime and say thank you so much for creating this great opportunity for all of us to come together. So I guess let's just jump right on in. Well, you know, I think that this conversation is a global conversation that's happening as cities and communities are addressing the impacts of extreme weather. Even last night, while we were here in DC, the city of Houston had a major tornado. And so, you know, this is a very interesting space. I think we're kind of in the dawn of a new era. And I want to kind of talk to John and Aubrey about your personal experience and kind of what led you here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So my name is Aubrey Germ, and I work for the city of Baltimore, so just a little drive away from here. And I am our climate and resilience planner. The work that I do is with the Office of Sustainability, which is part of the city's planning department. So I kind of do climate and resilience work from the lens of strategic planning and community engagement and relationship building, because that's what planners often are very good at, especially these days. And so I'm really, really passionate about applying the social resilience lens to any sort of more technical climate and resilience work. So even though our panel is resilience and infrastructure, I think I'm going to really be focusing a lot on social infrastructure and what that looks like in communities that are bearing the burden of climate change and are disproportionately impacted. Baltimore, as probably many of you know and recognize, is suffering from a lot of the same disparities as many cities. Poor, failing infrastructure, racial segregation, lack of access to resources, in particularly concentrated areas of poverty, vacancy and blight. Baltimore is actually one of the few major cities on the East Coast that is actively losing population. We are not growing like a lot of our other cities like Philadelphia and DC. And so what does that mean for a city like Baltimore that has so many amazing people and assets, but yet doesn't quite have the capital or the kind of resources necessary to kind of build momentum towards a more resilient future? Well, it takes scrappiness and it takes a lot of strategizing and relationship building and discovering where are our resources, where are our most valuable assets, and how do we really, work together to build a stronger community in the face of climate change. And so, and sometimes you have to look in places that might not be so obvious, and in communities where you don't necessarily see, like, it's very obvious, how many resources might exist there, but it's incredible when you do look how many resources exist and how tight communities can be, and how much social infrastructure there already is and exists, and kind of the perspective I bring coming from the city side is really trying to build those relationships, uncover the opportunities for building community-based resiliency in communities that are already resilient but could use a little extra connection and support from especially government resources. And so I'm going to probably be talking mostly about a specific program that is really successful in Baltimore and is serving as a national model for other cities. It's our Community Resiliency Hub program, but I'll leave it at that for now. But that's why I'm here, and I'm super excited to bring that kind of social resilience lens to this conversation.
Well, good morning, everyone. Anita and Aubrey, really an honor to be up here on the stage with you. I want to thank the City of the Future team for putting this conference together and GW for hosting. I'm John Hewa, the president and CEO of Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, and I know you just heard from my colleague, Dr. Peter Mahoro, and you're probably curious about the electric cooperative emphasis this morning, but I want to encourage everyone to think about the city health and the rural health together, right? I think if there's anything we've learned over the last several years is that we have to look at the system as a whole, whether it's been our economy, whether it's been healthcare or public health, whether it's been matters of security, both domestic and national. Just like that, with the electric grid and utility infrastructure, we have to look at the system as a whole. By way of quick background, I started my career with municipal electric utilities, including the utilities director for the city of Manassas, not far from here in the Washington, D.C. area. And then I've been the CEO of 3 electric cooperatives, surrounding Tallahassee, if you will, bordering Austin, Texas, the nation's largest electric cooperative, and now here in Central Virginia, triangulated by Charlottesville, Richmond, and Washington, D.C. And so my perspective today, I'm also a GW grad. I did my doctoral work here studying energy storage in the PJM structured wholesale electricity market. So my perspective today is really going to come from supporting infrastructure-based utilities, fiber, actually water and wastewater, as well as certainly electric, in the areas that are both municipal and the suburban regions surrounding urban areas. And I want to talk about kind of the interdependency, and I want to really talk today a little bit about some topics that I'm very passionate about. But we have an aging grid, right? We're here today to talk about infrastructure and resiliency. We're leaning on the grid more than we ever have before in so many different ways. And it's powering our industry and jobs. It's powering our health and prosperity. It's powering our warmth, comfort, and security. It's powering our tech and computing and computational power. And even today, it's even more so powering agriculture, as we see a pretty substantial wave of hydroponic farming and agriculture move across the nation. So I want to talk about that, but I really want to get into how this aging grid meets up with EV adoption and what I would call the fleet wave. And I will tell you, we have a problem. We have a gap on public policy. We have a gap on what the grid was designed for and the wave that is coming. And I think we can explore that a little further from a resiliency perspective.
Thank you so much. That really resonates a lot with me. I am here because I've been the executive director of Build San Antonio Green for on year 19. And we are a nonprofit partnership of the City of San Antonio, CPS Energy, and our county, Bexar County. And really our mission is to improve the quality of life of the people of San Antonio through our work. And I am driven by the love that I have for the people of San Antonio. That really is the driver for everything we do at Build San Antonio Green. I've seen a lot of change, as we all have, over the course of those 19 years. I'm a native San Antonio. I grew up in extreme poverty, food insecurity, all of the things. And I think that's really why I've dedicated my life to this service. I feel that this is a calling to help humanity. Kind of on that note, in terms of seeing things change, it's, we kind of went from, saving the polar bears to it's on our doorstep real quick. And, we've all seen that change over the course of the last 20 years. One of the things I'm excited about, though, is I think that there's a lot of innovation and creativity because our values have been changing. It's interesting how climate change, obviously, the extreme weather part of it. In the beginning of the conversation, climate change was just about emissions reduction. And I think there was a lot of focus on that. My focus has been on climate adaptation, and that's really the conversation that we're having, I think, because the extreme weather events highlights the inequitable infrastructure that we have. San Antonio, we're a historic city. We're over 300 years old. We share a lot of the same issues that your community shares, but the conversation is changing because our values have changed. In the past, it was kind of a top-down, this is what we're doing. But in San Antonio, we've, over the past several years, and even before the pandemic really, have begun to kind of re-engineer a more equitable world. So I kind of want to jump off and say, for me, equity is really the new face of resiliency, and we have a great opportunity to really get out here and do some good and improve people's lives. And so I kind of want to throw that question out there. What is resiliency for you?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. From a resiliency perspective, and I mentioned earlier, the degree to which we're leaning on, I'll focus on the electric grid, but also maybe telecom in this conversation, and that will increase profoundly, right? Our member owners, our consumers are wanting to, of course, receive extraordinarily reliable service. Work from home and other trends have put even more pressure on that. We are entering an era where our consumers, our owners, will be leaning on us for their transportation needs. We believe that at least in rural America, 70 to 80% of the charging will be actually at home. We know that we have to play a significant role in facilitating at-home capacity as well as public charging and infrastructure for our region. So from a resiliency perspective, I think there's a lot of keys here, but one is we've got to go back to kind of the basics of our system design. What was the system engineered for? What was it built for? What is it capable of delivering? And in this world of an aging environment, we're seeing the performance of our systems kind of nationally slip, right? The Department of Energy has reported that over 70% of transformers and transmission lines are greater than 25 years in service. Over 60% of circuit breakers are more than 30 years in operating service. And so we have a system that is beginning to slip in terms of performance at a time when public policy is pushing more and more emphasis into this infrastructure, and our member consumers are raising their expectations. So we're going to have to be very, very thoughtful about our investments. I have some concerns about kind of legacy and year-over-year incremental growth versus kind of stepping back and looking at the system as a whole, and really designing something that's going to be capable of a wave of transportation demands on the electric grid that I think is going to be unlike anything that we've ever seen. I think it's a far more massive and faster moving wave than even we saw with the propagation of air conditioning right across the United States. So we've got some real challenges here. I would say with all of this, though, our relationship with our stakeholders, in our case, our member owner consumers, we're going to have to be much better at the data analysis that Peter spoke of. We're going to have to do a much better job of communicating the status of our system. We're going to have to do a much better job in central coordination. I think this is a challenge for rural America because in the urban environment, you have the utility department alongside public works, and there could be a lot more efficiencies regarding design. In rural America, it's more disparate in terms of our work between counties and different utility agencies. So there's a lot here that needs to go into this, but we need to be looking at the system as a whole and looking at the original design of the network, whatever utility structure we're speaking of, and what we're going to see in terms of very pressing demands on that in the immediate years ahead.
And yes, I, to your point, completely agree that we cannot have resilience without equity. And in the city of Baltimore, we take that very seriously. I think through programs and equitable planning processes, we're really trying to make sure that whatever resilience work we are doing centers the community and centers equity, and brings other co-benefits, not just the climate resilience benefits, but also other aspects of resilience. So just to give an example, so the Community Resiliency Hub program that I manage is where we are working very intentionally to partner with community-based nonprofits that are in extremely climate vulnerable communities. And when I say they're climate vulnerable communities, they're vulnerable to everything else as well. And the same maps in Baltimore that demonstrate climate vulnerability also demonstrate all other aspects of economic, social, demographic, financial, all sorts of risks. And so, however we can be undoing that burden and undoing the legacies of injustice that have existed for decades, if not centuries, the better off the whole city will be, and our communities. And what we really try to focus on is the individual lived experience and livelihoods of residents. And so the model of the community resiliency program is working through those trusted anchor nonprofits that are interacting with and engaging with the most vulnerable residents in their communities in a day-to-day way. So your food kitchens, soup kitchens, your food pantries, those who are supporting workforce development programming, those who are supporting re-entry programming, those who are supporting, single mothers and abuse victims. So these are the organizations that people already are seeking support and services from on a day-to-day basis. These are the same organizations that people are going to gravitate towards in emergencies and disaster situations, because there's that inherent distrust of government resources, which cities and I think, generally are recognizing, but really need to take that into consideration when thinking about models of helping bring resources to communities that need them, and working through those trusted partners rather than being like, we're the city, we're swooping in and we're gonna, try to help with this, and this in an emergency. No, it's about trust building over time, relationship building over time, and the city being really honest about that. And so that's kind of where this program is really strong. So kind of I serve as a key relationship builder with community partners, and then they serve as the messengers for their communities. And so in kind of blue skies days, as we like to call it, and there's not a crisis or climate crisis happening, I would say, because, a lot of communities feel like they are in crisis daily, right? So there's the chronic stressors, and then there's the acute shocks that we're dealing with when we're talking about impacts and resilience and challenges associated with it. So we're dealing with different time scales, and that needs to be recognized. But relationship building takes time, but if you have stronger relationships kind of throughout relatively normal conditions, then when something major does happen, then people will be better off because those relationships and networks are already built. That social infrastructure is already understood, and whether it's something formal or informal, it can work so much better than when, something happened and we're just going to stand up all these different resources and things and try to create partnerships as it's happening. No, people and communities are most vulnerable in the minutes, hours, and days immediately after a disaster. And sometimes it takes city response efforts days to kind of catch up to where it needs to be to help address the major food insecurity challenge that happened because of that disaster, to bring the right types of resources into communities to help, at least with the recovery process, or the immediate recovery process. It takes time. So the more that we can be helping build capacity in communities, specifically through their anchor partners that already have that trust built, the more that we can really support rapid deployment of resources to communities and getting it to the people who need it most, the fastest. And the pandemic really showed this. There's a lot of, silver linings, so to speak, that kind of came out in lessons learned of emergency response efforts in the pandemic, and I'm happy to talk more about that at some point, but there's just so much there that we can learn about how mutual aid efforts and informal community networks, coupled with and complementary to more formal city and institutional structures, work better together and need to work better together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the, I guess, silver linings to what we experienced, not only the pandemic, but Winter Storm Uri in 2021, the great state of Texas, we never saw that coming. But I have never been more proud to be from San Antonio than I was at that time, because, people hustled. And it was really people that made the difference. They coordinated with each other, and they saved our city. We are very fortunate, and the longer I've been around, the more I realize this when I talk to other communities, because San Antonio, we have a municipally owned electric utility and a municipally owned water utility. But that doesn't mean they always necessarily all, historically talk to each other. But that has really changed over the last decade or so. And to your point, because we were already positioning there in the water energy nexus, because we were already positioning and starting to bring up equity, and we have an equity framework in our budget, and start making these investments. When it happened, people really responded. And I'll have to say this, for me, I think it's, you know, a lot of this is, technology, and, we can talk about infrastructure and so on. But for me, it really centers around your values and your will, because it's not, I think, technology that's going to get us there. It's going to be like a love and caring of people, and using data as a tool to, again, re-engineer a new world. So, John?
Yeah, from an equity perspective, when we talk about the natural disasters, right? Our 40-year running average is nearly tripled in the last 5 years of inflation-adjusted billion-dollar disasters, right? So storms are happening bigger, more frequently. We started last year with Winter Storm Frida. That was the one that shut down I-95, and our utility spent $20 million in the first 2 weeks of the year. But from an equity perspective, when the legacy system, when the legacy platform is challenged, the solutions tend to evolve through technology and at the edge. The problem is that those edge solutions, we've got to make sure that those edge solutions are available for all stakeholders, right? For all consumers, for all citizens, for all parties, regardless of their socioeconomic or demographic capabilities, right? We've got to make sure that those systems are available to them, such as distributed resources, energy storage, rooftop solar, the type of edge technologies and investments that can supplant or enhance the performance of a traditional legacy system that is now confronted with the immediacy of greater climate disaster, more frequent climate disaster, more impactful outcomes, and a greater dependency on those systems, whether it's connectivity with fiber and telecommunications, whether it's clean water and wastewater services, or whether it's the electric grid itself. So what I would say in this area, though, is that, and where utilities, regardless of the utility, investor-owned, municipal, or cooperative, and cities and the areas they serve, I think to a certain extent, or maybe to a large extent, some of the wires utilities were a little slow in the early years out of the gates with respect to the embracing distributed resources. I'm thankful to see, and I believe that trend is turning, and turning much for the better. Now, as we see the deployments of those systems, though, we've got to make sure that it's equitable in the way that they're rolled out and who has access to those platforms.
And speaking of distributed energy systems, that's one of the more costly but major investments, or we see it as a major investment in our community partners that we work with in our Resiliency program, is deploying rooftop solar and battery backup power for the community orgs that are in this program. And that is getting at exactly what John just said, bringing these resources that might not otherwise be accessible to climate vulnerable communities directly to the community. And it's not easy. I've been doing a lot of grant fundraising in order to make it happen. But luckily in the state of Maryland, through our Maryland Energy Administration, there are some great grant programs that can be utilized to support communities that are most vulnerable to climate change through distributed energy resources. And so, these are the same communities that are having more and longer grid outages than other communities, or they don't have the resources to kind of weather those grid outages. And oftentimes grid outages are coupled with major, weather events. And so these communities often have less access to weatherproofed homes, or air conditioning, or adequate heating, or are at increased fire risk because of, lack of building code adherence, things like that. I mean, there's so much risk, right? And the more that we can be bringing resilience building resources to communities, the better. And the community resiliency hub model is really about building that capacity at the community org level. So we are supporting retrofits and energy efficiency upgrades to their buildings, the rooftop solar and battery storage, so that they have backup power capabilities, not just for their own operations, but also to support community members that might be displaced, or their power might go out, and they might need refrigeration capacity for if they're breastfeeding, or if they have insulin that needs to be refrigerated, or food stores. A lot of people don't even have enough food to get through a couple couple of days, or if their refrigerator goes out, they don't have the food. So having a local community partner that is trusted, that has the backup power resources to support residents in disaster situations, whatever it might be, the various scenarios that you can think of, at least there is that in right there in the community. They're not waiting for that type of resource to come in from outside. And the community partners, are the ones that have that trust with the community members, and they can message, about what they are able to support with and for. So we also supply these organizations with energy with preparedness supplies and emergency resources, with training, and with direct connection to city government folks. So our Office of Emergency Management is a huge supporter of this program, because they're the ones that are on the ground in larger scale emergencies, figuring out where resources are going, and they recognize the power of the community partner in their emergency operations strategies. For example, our health department supported the resiliency hubs through. Actually, the resiliency hub supported the health department, I will say, actually, in helping get COVID vaccination, increase COVID vaccination and testing access in communities that had really high COVID rates and low vaccination rates. They actually came and were like, "Hey, can we look at your list of community partners, because we're looking for more partners?" And I was like, "Yes, here you go, absolutely." They, like, all the resiliency hubs are community orgs that are willing. They have the willpower to do this work. I consider them all natural fit organizations. Like, they're the community orgs that will already be doing this work and have already been doing this work for a very, very long time. But it's a matter of recognizing their work, acknowledging it, and helping, and not seeing the city's response as separate from, but that leveraging the work that they're already doing, and not putting the burden on them, but making sure that the resources are actually being helpful. And so for that to work, it has to be, two-way communication, and that relationship piece. And it's really wonderful, because I'm really able to understand and hear firsthand what's going on in a lot of the communities where resiliency hubs are, because they're able to say, "Hey, this is what we're hearing and seeing right now. Can the city be adaptive and help get resources here in a different way, because what's happening right now isn't working. We are not seeing those resources, and our community is continuing to suffer. We still don't have vaccination clinics here. We still don't have testing clinics here. Our emergency food distribution sites are their food is out in 30 minutes, so we need more of that. And how can we, how can the city adapt to what our needs are? And then I'm able to communicate that, for example, to other city agencies that have access to those resources, and say, this is what's happening. And that channel of communication is so critical. It's the community telling the city what needs to happen, not the city telling the community what needs to happen. And that paradigm really has to shift, not just for climate resilience, but for all other kind of government programs, I think. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good segue into something I wanted to ask all of you. And this is around this adaptive work, right? These adaptive strategies that we're creating to bring everyone along, right? So at Build San Antonio Green, one of the things that we've been working on is, thinking about the future. Where are we going and why? What does San Antonio look like decades from now? And then trying to design to that. So, we started out as a green building program. So we're doing above code, new construction, retrofits, across single family, multifamily, commercial buildings. But it was really our work in our climate plan in San Antonio that, I guess we kind of had an epiphany that we needed to start preparing our buildings for extreme weather. So we created a program called Climate Ready. And it really is the building of the future. It is beyond just efficiency and conservation and renewables. It's into the space of resiliency. So we looked around the country at different cities that had an environment that San Antonio is kind of moving. We're getting hotter. We flood a lot. We never saw the winter storm Uri coming. The snow was not something we were thinking about, though. So when we looked at all, what are the solutions that are out there in other cities that have some of the same issues or issues that we will be having, and then we put that into our mix. So it's, beyond green building into this climate-ready space. I know we have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to kind of throw that out there. Can you give us a quick, what are some of those, the short list, the most impactful thing that you're working on right now, that you're excited about, that's going to, become the next thing?
Yeah, well, thank you. Great question, and I've really enjoyed this discussion from a climate preparation perspective. A couple of things that we've got working on that I think are really important. One, and Aubrey mentioned these are really hard programs, right? They're very, very difficult to get these things rolled out, right? And one of those programs that our team spent a year working on an on-bill tariff program, an ability for us to go in, help a consumer, focusing predominantly on residential, and being a facilitator, right? Our roles as a member-owned cooperative is largely to be a facilitator in the community. One of those things that we want to help is with affordability. We want to help with protections against extreme climate, whether it's degree days, heating or cooling. We're seeing less norms and more extremes. And so our program goes in and looks at and works with a member owner, a household. We do a complete turnkey, analysis on the structure and the energy efficiency of the home. Our team's objective is to identify cost savings, and then we turn around on the tariff, on the power bill, and we finance. We just pulled down basically USDA loan, a 0% interest USDA loan to help support our program, but we help finance on the face of the power bill an investment that we help the homeowner determine that after the investment and essentially the principal and interest, the repayment is added to the power bill, that they will still have a net improvement in overall energy costs. And so that's kind of an ideal win-win, right, in all regards, where we have a situation where we can help a homeowner reduce their energy footprint, increase their comfort and livability, and we can, as a utility, we can stand in as a facilitator. We're going to have to find similar programs for transportation. I know we haven't gotten into that deeply, but I will tell you, our analysis looking at just a 40% adoption rate in the year 2030 on our grid, I will tell you, to me, I would characterize it as a meltdown, right? The grid was not built for what is coming. And that is going to have very, very disruptive and disparate outcomes in terms of where the investments are made in the grid. How we are able to universally support transportation as an essential need. And so we've got to look for similar programs, and we've got to make sure that in our planning and our design and our outlook for the future, that we are not stuck in legacy thinking of just year over year incremental growth, 1.5% growth, and we're just adding, the same structure with kind of the next wire size. We've got to really come back and look at how does the system need to be designed for the future.
And then I would add, at the same time that these larger, really complex infrastructure and grid projects are happening, I'm going to say, keep the focus on the community partners as well. Invest in your community partners. If you're government, if you're a private entity, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a funder, money can go so far at a local nonprofit, and especially one that is service-based, that is reaching residents and vulnerable individuals daily, because they're the ones that really are the lifesavers in emergency, not just day-to-day, but in emergency situations. And that investment pays dividends. And I hear, oftentimes, like with the partners that I work with, they're like, any resource that you send our way, we will make sure that it goes as far as possible. If it's money, if it's food, if it's energy efficiency, if it's solar, because all of the cost savings for these organizations go right back into their operations helping people. And so that's just, I would say, in all the aspects of your work, think about the community partner.
I don't know where the time went, but apparently we have 1 minute and 13 seconds. And I would love to open it up for a quick question. I don't want to get in trouble, Ricky, and run over. But does anyone have a question for our wonderful panelists? Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm wondering, in your communities, how much philanthropy, like particularly local, like hyper-local philanthropy, community foundations or anchor institution, related foundations are playing in supporting the work of some of these partners or these sort of social networks as it relates to resilience, if
Yeah,
they are.
so really timely question. Just yesterday, had a meeting with a bunch of philanthropy partners that, on their own, kind of following an E. coli outbreak in Baltimore City, drinking water in a very low income area of West Baltimore, and also coupled with pandemic COVID response efforts, are starting to really gather and organize around the conversation of how can philanthropy better support disaster response. And so those are all local partners in Baltimore City, and I wish I had more time to talk about it, but
Hey,
yes,
2, 1.
it's a big thing that is growing, and
Yeah.
I hope it will continue to grow.
Well, listen, thank you so much. Let's give these guys a round of applause. You're awesome. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Thank you to Z Prime. Thank you all for having us, and let's continue the conversation. And again, I think my thing I want to leave you with is people that make the difference. It is our intentions and thinking about how the lives of others is I think what's going to move us forward. So thank you so much.